Hi all, it's Matt. Here's an episode devoted to convolution reverb from Cockos. It's called Reverb for both the French and the Americans. It's a convolution reverb. We're going to explain it shortly. We'll dissect the plugin thoroughly as it's poorly covered online. There are either little bits or things that aren't explained properly. So I'm going to try to be clear and precise. Then there'll be no more secrets with the reverb. Let's start. We open Reaper immediately. I'd already opened it. What I'm going to do first is create a track with the voice inside. So here it is. Recorded a post-sync track with a girl. It's for a video shredding project of mine. And the result is this.
I'll be cooking tonight.
Really? What's the occasion?
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
Okay, and so on. The second step is a track where we're going to insert our reverb. So I create a track, double click, and here I'm going to open Cockos Reverb. And there it is. Initially nothing. It's a bit empty. What we're going to do before we do anything is route our post-sync vocal signal into the reverb. I can do one simple thing, that's slide. I've got my channel 1-2 from this track into channel 1-2 from the track where the reverb is. Well, I only work with one channel anyway. I'm in mono here, so I can easily select only channel 1. And anyway, we'll work on that later. But for the moment, my channel 1 goes into channel 1. I've put my master routing in 5.1 because there are some interesting things you can do in 5.1 with Reverb too. So we're already going to colorize it, otherwise it's ugly. I made myself a little shortcut to choose the colors quickly. What's more, it creates a color gradient, so it's not exactly the same color. If you want this script, check out Kawa script. The Kawa color script has all kinds of cool coloring tricks. As you can see, there's nothing going on in Reverb at the moment because there's nothing in this little square here. In this little square you can add a whole bunch of modules. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 modules. Let's do the 8 modules. That's why the video will be long, but we'll start with the simplest ones. Next we'll tackle the harder ones. I'll explain all these parameters. When modules are present, else my adjustments won't produce sound. Then I'll just talk. So I'm going to add the first and simplest module. This is the reverb generator. Go! And now stuff's happening. So already now when I listen to my sound it goes like this.
I'll be cooking tonight.
Really? What's the occasion?
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
Okay, you can see that my sound is a little loud.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything. Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
Why? Because my sound goes into the reverb makes sound come out, and it's routed in my master, and my original sound is also routed in the master. So I have 2x original sound, 1x reverb. I'm going to remove my original sound which goes into the master. We will perceive the sound only because it's emitted from the tool known as the Reverb Effect plugin. Now it'll sound a bit better.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
That's fine. 6 dB less loud. So now that we can hear the reverb, I can explain these buttons. Wet. Wet is the reverb signal without the original signal, i.e. just the reverb. And dry is just the original signal without the reverb. So if I take out the dry and put in only wet, that's what I hear.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
And if I add a little dry?
Actually, I'm not going to tell you.
I have a mix of both. That means I can now dose it. I can add a little less reverb and more dry for a more natural silky effect.
You're terrible.
It also means I can adjust the distance from my hearing point to what I see in the image. In other words, the more wet and less dry I use, the further away I'll be.
You're terrible.
It adds distance.
You're terrible.
I'm all set and I have a small quiet room reverb with me. Okay. Width. That's the stereo width. Now it's maxed out. Here I have a stereo reverb. If I set it to 0, I'll go faster if I write 0.
You're terrible.
Here my reverb isn't very wide, it's just in the middle.
You're flat.
Whereas here it takes up a bit of stereo. If I go to -1, it's just as wide in terms of stereo, but left and right are inverted. Okay, hop. The pan is, do I send my reverb to the left or to... Easy.
Your flat's fine.
So here I send my reverb to the left.
Checkup, actually.
If I remove the dry, my reverb is on the left. And here my reverb is on the right. Easy to understand. Then pre-reverb means, is my reverb starting before my original sound, my original signal? And I can then decide how many milliseconds before it starts. So for example, if I take this piece and set it to, I don't know, 120, 163 milliseconds, my reverb will leave before the original signal.
Oh, hang on.
Okay, I'm going to exaggerate.
Oh, hang on.
Okay? So that's to either compensate for things or to make effects that are a little bit creative. If we want something natural in general, we'll leave it at 0, but it depends on each person. Do as you wish, okay? Then all that, these are the parameters of the classic reverb generator. Start position is the opposite of pre-reverb. This reverb, is it going to start after my original signal, and after how long? So here, if I set it to like 1008, almost a second, it'll do that.
It's no problem. Oh.
Okay, so here if I turn down my wet,
It's no problem.
so the reverb leaves later. In the same way, it can be used to compensate for things or to create artistic effects. Length. Length is better if the room size is large, we'll see later. But when considering the reverb's volume,
It's no problem.
it's merely the specific sound signal of the reverb. So it's here, it's like increasing my wet, but between here with the same wet, between here
It's no problem.
and here,
It's no problem.
there's more or less reverb. So this is self-explanatory, as they say. Explanative. So room size, well, it's like saying, well, instead of being in a small room, I'm in a big room. If I go from 50 to 83, you can see that my reverb tail, i.e. my late reflections, have a lot more energy for a long time. So let's listen.
It's no problem. Oh.
Okay.
Try again upstairs, okay?
And you can see that this reverb tail cuts off drastically at the end.
Try again upstairs, okay?
Alright, this is mainly because our specific length needs adjustment. You can see very clearly on the diagram that my reverb is cut off. So if I adjust the length, you can see that I'm going to get a reverb tail that goes all the way to the end. Here, there's no energy left, so I'm going to get something pretty.
Upstairs, okay?
Here's my reverb.
Upstairs, okay?
It goes all the way through. So length, it depends on how much time you need for your reverb tail to finish. But you can also cut on purpose for an artistic effect.
Try again upstairs, okay?
It's more in music. I think we use stuff like that. In post, we like it natural and clean. Dampening. Now here, what is dampening? It means wet, but it also means muffled. So in fact, it's muffling, removing high frequencies in the late reflections. I'll put my reflections back on. Dampening. It's like putting carpets, curtains, furniture, absorbent surfaces in the room. Got something at 50 here? It's a pretty average dampening. It's even very average 50 since it's from 0 to 100, I think. Yes, so this is how it essentially translates.
Okay, I'm just gonna...
If I completely remove dampening 0, that means I have 0 absorbent surface in my room, so that's what I get.
Okay, I'm just gonna try again upstairs, okay?
Okay, that upstairs is interesting.
Again upstairs.
It's heard.
Again upstairs.
The reflections of the S. If you add dampening,
Again upstairs.
okay, it's a little muffled reverb, a little...
Again upstairs, okay? Again upstairs, okay?
Hear the difference. I'll play it once more.
Again upstairs, okay? Again upstairs, okay?
Indeed, if one wishes to introduce curtains to enhance the atmosphere and achieve a stereo width, it's the same function we're discussing. So I go from 1 to -1, and in the middle I'm in mono, so 0.
Again upstairs, okay?
Here I've got everything happening
Again
in the
upstairs,
middle.
okay?
I have no stereo width. And that's the end of it. I've covered all parameters here but haven't yet explained this one. I'll do it now. Performance. Therefore performance. We've got max, FFT, ZL, LL and set all. Max FFT. Basically it's complex mathematical stuff, Fourier transforms. But basically the higher this number, the less CPU it will take. So here I can choose up to 32. 32 uses a lot of CPU and 16,000 doesn't use a lot of CPU. ZL is the zero latency function. Okay, no latency for our reverb monitoring. And LL, which stands for low latency, is something that separates tasks into different cores of our processor. So it's actually going to make it easier to use the processor to run the reverb. To see how it works, go to View and the performance meters here. And here. By the way, I didn't name my reverb, I'll do it now. So reverb. And you can see that my reverb currently uses 0.012 core. So by default it's like that. Here it's a percentage of CPU, but I like to look at it in core, which means that here I've got 13 per 1000 of a single CPU core, so 2% of the general CPU with other apps. And if I play my reverb, you can see that I'm up to 16, 15, 16.
How do you say you get laid this time?
Okay, now if I remove that and that, first of all I've got my plug-in delay compensation, which is at 16,384 to compensate.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
Okay. If I now go to 32, what's going to happen?
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
For the moment it's fine, but I'm not using a CPU anymore and I'm going to go one core over on the
You're
CPU.
terrible.
That's it, I'm starting to exceed one CPU core or almost one CPU core.
Your flat's
struggling
fine.
a bit. If I set latency to 0, it's pointless. Now I've got 3 CPUs in use at the same time. This is the result. And that's what LL, low latency, is for. Instead of working on 300% of a CPU core, it will work on 3 different CPUs. So I do this and then I'm down to 22 per 1000 of 3 CPUs in fact.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you
and it works
anything.
at 32.
That's fine. How do you say you get
With this
laid
method,
this time?
I'm using 20, 21,
You're
20 per
terrible.
1000 units of core, and at this location it's typical for me to use less.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you anything.
That's fine.
So basically you have to remember that, and it's good to keep that in mind, and the smaller it is, the more CPU it uses. So if we have 46 reverbs lit in our project, maybe we'll want to use a large number, but if we don't have many, we may want to use a small number. For rendering purposes, I've heard that it's better to uncheck this and that and render afterward. I've heard that it's cleaner. Well, the thing is, if I've got 65 reverbs on, I'm not going to have fun opening all my 65 reverbs and unchecking this every time. So that's what this button is for. Set all. So, for example, if I create a new track with a reverb, and this is unchecked, and I do set all. If I choose another max FFT 1024 and do this, it will configure all my reverbs in the same way. So I'm going to stay like this, but I'm going to set low latency here, that's important, and I'm going to set voila. Tack, it works. Hop, I close this, I don't need it, and it's good for performance. Okay, so we move on to the second module after the reverb generator. I'll take the second easiest, it's the echo generator here. Tack. If I have both switched on, I'll have an echo plus a reverb. Currently, I'll deselect my reverb to solely listen to the echo. Now, it's mostly intuitive except these 2 minor points I'll explain later. So start position is, when does my echo start?
That's fine.
So I'm going to take a cue here, the end of a line.
Reception's really bad.
It starts straight away. If I set a start position at 736 milliseconds, so almost a second, that gives this.
Hello? Hello? Okay, yeah. Okay.
The effect starts 736 milliseconds later. This is self-explanatory. Length, this is how long the effect lasts. Here, if I put 1 second and a bit, it'll last 1 second and a bit.
Okay.
Okay. Then the spacing is how far apart my reflections are. Same thing here, I'm at 10 milliseconds, so I hear kind of a musical note.
Okay.
I'm hearing 100 Hertz, because frequency is the inverse of period, so 1 over 0.01 is 100. So 100 Hertz. If you've studied well your acoustics, you'd know straight away. So if I want a 50 Hertz plus harmonics, I set myself to 20 milliseconds, and there I have 50 Hertz.
Okay.
So I have 50 plus all the harmonics plus the original sound, so I get a weird sound with a 50 Hertz fundamental. So here, if my aim is to create a true echo, I'm going to set it to 400, because a real echo takes half a second, or perhaps consider 300.
Hello? 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 Okay.
So spacing spaces out the reflections. Error. It's going to space them out a bit more than what we said in spacing. So here, instead of spacing at 402, I've got to space at 427. Okay.
Hello? Okay,
I'm going to increase, I'm going to put in 3 seconds so we get the idea.
Hello?
Between this and this.
Hello? Okay.
Hard to see the difference, but if I put 100 milliseconds,
Hello? Okay,
we can appreciate the difference. It's actually a spacing error, but regular. So these two work together. Error and error DST. I don't know if this means distortion or distribution, but basically, if I put 100 milliseconds here, and I put a lot of DST, well, it's going to be an irregular thing.
Hello?
Okay, we don't have regular spacing, we have things that are irregular, if I set it to the max.
Hello?
Okay, and if I set it to 0, well, it's as if I hadn't done anything.
Hello? Okay,
Okay, I've got my 402 plus 84. And finally, these last two, which are also very simple, are at what volume do I start in relation to the original sound, my first reflection. So start volume, if I set it to 0, my first reflection will be equal to the source signal.
Hello?
And end volume is for setting the volume of my last reflection. So if I set it to infinity, I'll get a full fade.
Hello?
Regular.
Hello?
Okay, so I can put very little dynamic with everything low, or I can put very little dynamic with everything very high. Here, my first reflection will be stronger than the original signal.
Hello?
It'll stop dead. I can set it very loud or very low.
Okay,
You don't hear the first reflection is stronger as the start position 0. But if I set the start position to 452, so that it's a bit like the others, 452, okay, well, 444.
Hello?
The second hello is stronger because it's the first reflection.
Hello? Okay,
So that's it. Echo is pretty simple. So you can put reverb plus echo in series.
Hello?
But on the other hand, the echo is not affected by the reverb whether I put it after or before.
Hello?
Let's progress to another element, particularly reverse. So if I put reverse, it reverses everything that was there before. So the echo generator here, I've set it to last 9 seconds. We'll reduce it. And my reverb, I put it on for 4 seconds. We'll also lessen it. So for reverse, it goes like this.
Hello? Okay, hello? Okay,
Alright, this is helpful for generating effects, either in sound design or in music. In post, if we want naturalness with reverse, forget it. And wet, which is at 0 dB, it's a question of do I use it a lot or not at all.
Okay,
If I use more of it.
Try again upstairs, okay? Just gonna try again upstairs, okay?
So currently I'm increasing the intensity of my inverted reverb effect. Dry, it's actually the original signal. In fact, the original signal is the signal with my reverb. So here the reverb is simply inverted. But if I add dry, my reverb appears here. So I can make the reverb go down and up.
Hello?
And my echo is reversed too. Of course, if I remove the echo, it's no longer there.
Hello? Okay,
So reverb and echo don't affect each other. Reverse, on the other hand, affects what's before it. Okay? So if I wanted to affect the reverb but not the echo, I have to put it between the two like this. And now my echo isn't reversed, but my reverb is, as you can see on the diagram. Okay? Alright, so that was referencing reverse. So let's move on to the next one. What is normalize? Normalize, self-explanatory. I'll remove the reverse. Removing reverb generator. At 0, I'd better not put play there, because it's going to be really loud, but I can normalize my maximum reserve level. I can tell him my level. Max is going to be at -15.
Hello?
Which is already very loud.
Hello? Okay, yeah.
It's more like a normal thing would be around -30. So now we're going to move on to the best part of the video, because we're going to talk about convolution reverb. So hang on to your seat, because this is going to be crazy huge. First of all, what's a convolution reverb? A convolution reverb means that we're going to digitally create a reverb that exists in the real world. Why is it so interesting to have a real reverb that you can recreate digitally? Because, for example, I'm shooting in a warehouse and we're doing a fight scene, you know, an action movie. So there's fighting going on. The characters are talking, so we take live sound of the characters saying their dialogues, look out, I'm going to hit you, and so on. Indeed, it's understood that we will use sound design for fight scenes, as the reality is that raw, live fight sounds don't meet the quality we want. They simply do not sound very good. We're gonna fake it. We'll record punches, kicks, things like that. But we tend to do that in the studio because we often don't have the time on set to do it again on location. So okay, except that in the studio, there's zero warehouse reverb, and to recreate a warehouse reverb with the reverb generator, be my guest, you might be able to do it, but in fact, you're going to spend like 63 hours doing it to get it exactly right. With convolution reverb, you load a file, put it in the reverb, and you get the original reverb you wanted. So there are two use cases. Either you import what's known as an impulse response file. You find IR on the net, and you put your IR file in the reverb, and it will calculate the reverb of the original room. I am providing you with a link to the freely accessible impulse response databases, which are made available as and when you peruse through the instructional manual of REAPER and similar kinds of materials. When you go to the REAPER forum, you get 2 or 3 basic free things, and secondly, you can make your own and get the reverbs you precisely and exactly want. That's the beauty of convolution reverb. So first we'll use the banks to see how it works, and then I'll teach you how to make your own impulse response. Therefore, if you navigate to the pages I've instructed you to download and proceed by adding the file, you have the opportunity to download all content at no cost. Contained therein is the CKSDE analog delay, reverb and synesthesia samples, etc. So for example, I'll take reverb, all that, you can download it, and then I'll teach you how to get Apple's impulse responses to be compatible. So when you download GarageBand and all that, okay, here we're going to take one at random. We're going to take Big Room. What does an impulse response file look like? It looks like this. Whiplash like this, a firecracker. I don't know if I'll take one. That's a big room. If I take a small room, it's still the same firecracker, but with less reverb at the end. Okay, so here, for example, we'll take big room. And we do open. And what do I see? I see something like this. When you notice something white over there extending to the limit, don't play it immediately. Instead, first turn down its level. So to turn it down here, we have all the parameters of our file, of our convolution reverb. Here you have something called normal. Here you can apply a -18 dB of gain, and we'll put it here for this one. And it's a more typical thing for a reverb. We're not going to break our ears when we listen to it.
Hello?
So this is the big room reverb. You can mix this reverb in mono or not. So if I mix it in mono, I'll have just one channel.
Hello? Okay.
And you'll hear everything in the middle. In this case, I leave it in stereo. Destination channel offset. It means it starts at 1 and offset by 1. Here, it means that your reverb starts at 1. So if you have 2 channels, your reverb takes channels 1 and 2. If you have 1 channel, it takes channel 1. If you put 2 here, then your reverb takes channels 2 and 3. And in 1 there's nothing. Okay, so to ease we'll make it 1. Okay. Alright, this explains how to import and effectively use an impulse response, ensuring that it functions optimally. Once you're in a folder with lots of impulse responses, you can also go in there, and you'll see all the other responses in the same folder. Handy. So now, if I take another one instead,
Hello?
small place, it goes something like this.
Okay, I'm just gonna try again upstairs, okay?
So it can happen that we have acoustics like that, but not as wet. So I use a lot of dry and very little wet. Here, like -30.
Hello? Okay, I'm just gonna try again upstairs, okay?
There, that's something a bit more natural for a room that's acoustically dégueulasse, as we say in France. Sometimes you need it. Now you're gonna tell me that we can only make adjustments to the reverb wet and dry, correct? False. In fact, you can also add another module after the file, which will affect all the other modules. You must tread lightly. This specific module corresponds to trim, gain, and stretch. And here we have our start position. It won't start here with the first reflections, it'll start later. but it'll start at the same moment as the direct sound. So I'll show you. Here, in fact, it cuts, it trims, it always starts at the same moment as the direct sound, but it doesn't take the first reflections.
Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
What will change the position of the beginning of the response as we did with the reverb generator start position option? It's like start position reverb. It shifts the beginning of your reverb. And if I do this, you'll see that it always trims. Okay, max length is the same. It's 20 seconds max. But you could reduce it like before. You could cut before. It's always good to have the whole thing, I think. But well, the gain is the gain of the reverb. You can make it louder or softer. Stretch, where if you do negative it shrinks and if you do positive it stretches. So basically you increase or decrease the energy of the first reflections and everything that follows. Thus, if I shrink, you would observe it becomes far more ethereal, and my early reflections, they actually lessen somewhat, which essentially results in something notably lighter in nature. Whereas here you can see that this increases and it's going to be a much more compressed stuff.
Hello? Hello?
And much longer too. The stretching and shrinking process, frankly, it's not really intuitive what this thing does, in essence. Because when you shrink, it feels like it's stretching. But basically, when you shrink, you get a less dense reverb.
Hello?
And when you increase, you get a very dense reverb.
Hello?
With big first reflections that last a long time. Width, it's the same as that. Do you increase the stereo width even more? You can see the influence here. Or do you invert the two? So you're actually inverting the stereo. Or are you reducing the stereo to 0? If you go to 0, you're reducing the stereo.
Hello?
No, we're almost mono. And the pan is left or right, classic.
Hello?
So my reverb here, if I remove the dry,
Hello?
I've got it on the left,
Hello?
I've got it on the right, okay? Plus it's on the diagram, so it's great. So with a file, plus in series a gain stretch trim, we can still modify our original convolution reverb file, so it's even more powerful. Okay, so the moment you've been waiting for since the beginning of the video is how do you make your file there to have your own reverb? How do you create your impulse response? Well, you see here you have impulse response generation utilities. Okay. So first you need to generate a test tone, and then you need to broadcast it to a loudspeaker in the room you want to model, and you record your loudspeaker with a microphone. So the flatter your speaker, the better. A flat stage means a flat response curve. So there's no particular color or timbre. Once we've recorded this test tone, we're going to deconvolve it with this function here. I'll show you how. First, you need to generate the test tone. So you press this, then it tells you want to generate. Yeah, but what length? Then what sample rate? It's critical. A 48,000 speaker recording simply won't function with a 40-4100 test tone. So basically I'm in 48, I'm going to make a 48, but the ideal is to make them in advance and make one in 48. Save. A 44-100 that I'll call 44-100, and then I'll put it in 44-100, still in 32 bits, that's fine. The bit depth doesn't matter, not an issue if you don't have the same bit depth. Now I'm going to generate one in 96,000 because I'm like this. 96,000, and I'll call it 96,000. Save. Now because I'm too crazy, I'm going to put 192,002. I'll use 192,000 here if possible. I've never tried that. Save. Okay, it's good. So what happened was that it created a 44-100 test, the 4896 and 192,000. Okay. Alright, so now it's time to start recording this specific test tone. So first I'm going to create a track that I'm going to make pink like this, a little purple Dunno. What's this color? Rose fuchsia? Dunno. And here I'm going to set my test tone to 48,000. So this one here. Now I'll position it in this spot. Okay, so if I zoom in, there's nothing there. Except that there's actually something there, but it's normalized to 0. There's so much stuff, it actually seems empty. So be careful before you listen to it, before you press play, because it's really loud. Okay, so this is an audio sweep. We'll listen, but I'll make it quieter to save your ears. And this is what it sounds like, a sinusoidal sweep. broadcast this through your speaker. The ideal is to diffuse this so that your speakers don't spit, and your microphone, you try to get a good signal between -18 and -12. You're perfectly fine, away from the microphone's background noise, and have 12 decibel headroom remaining. Given that it's a strong signal, you can slightly exceed -12 if you wish. Regardless, afterwards, you will have to normalize it once again. So here we go, we're going to record this sound. Essentially, I'm setting up a recording track. This track will record a mono input, which is a single signal. This input comes from my microphone. I'm going to do a mono reverb because I don't want to unpack all my stereo mic and stuff. Furthermore, I don't think I've got my mic stereo bar with me, so we're not going to listen to it so it doesn't sound like feedback. So we'll start at the beginning and then place the mic, and off we go. We're going to record this audio sweep here, and I'm going to broadcast it on my center speaker, so I'm going to route it. I'm not going to put it in the master. I'm going to put it directly into an output that I choose. So that's the center, and off I go. Alright, I'm filled with joy. This particular process will be assigned the label Convolution, as my subsequent step will involve carrying out its deconvolution. Upon completing these tasks, I shall proceed to submit or export the file. Except first, I'll go into item processing and normalize it to 0 pick. Okay, that way it's fat. Now I'm going to listen to what this thing is. It's my chair and me, so we don't want it, and I'm going to render it. File, render. I'll name it my living room convo like that. And I'll put it in a folder called IR matchat in 24 bits 48,000. All's well, I'm rendering it. Okay. I close it. So now I've got something called my living room convo, and I'm going to deconvolve it. So I go into convolve and it doesn't tell me. But before, in previous versions, it would ask me what file do you want to deconvolve. And now it's my living room convo. Go. Then it opens another window. Could you specify which tone test you plan to use for the deconvolution of this item? Mine's the 48,000 since I recorded it at 48,000. Go. Following that, where would you like to store it and what name would you prefer? It's going to be called my living room IR as in impulse response 48,000. I'll also put it in. I'll take it in 24 bits. Save. And now it's made my living room reverb. If I attend to this sound now, I'll include it in a fresh musical track. And in fact, if I zoom in, given that my room isn't very reverberant, I try to have acoustics that aren't too bad. Where I'm making sound, well, I still have a reverb, but the impulse response is very small like that. So that's what you see here. This I can delete, this I mute, this I mute, this I mute too, I even erase it. Now if I listen to Anna talking with my living room reverb, I get this.
I'll be cooking tonight.
So it sounds like I'm in my living room, but I'm listening from the kitchen.
I'm not gonna tell you anything.
And now I'm
That's
putting the
fine.
sound straight
How
on.
do you say you get laid this time?
You're terrible.
We'll take this bit.
It's no problem.
So this is with,
It's no problem.
this is without, not much different then, since I recorded it in my living room. But if I'm like that and I use a lot of reverb,
It's no problem. It's no problem.
now
It's no problem.
something different, without,
Oh, hang on. Reception's really bad.
with.
I'm just gonna move around a bit. Is that any better?
Alright, it's very real. If I'd added this dialogue that took place in this room, and there was real dialogue that had been taken in this room originally during the film, it would have been completely seamless. Hence, the convolution reverb is extremely powerful for this reason. Incidentally, I can also see that my reverb is tiny like that, but it's 6.91 seconds long. As luck would have it, that's the size of this thing here, my convoluted thing. I could also take this one. Edit it. So I don't need all that. All I truly need is this.
Damn it.
But I'll give it some time. Okay. And I could render and replace it. So in this scenario, if I conduct the rendering, we shall name it as 2 and proceed with rendering it.
Tac. Close.
And now go. If I browse and take the 2, open. Now you can see I've only got 1.87 seconds instead of 6. So it's a little cleaner. And a module I didn't show is filter LPHP. So that's going to be easier with the generator reverb. Here to show you. So tac. Basically I've got a normal reverb. I remove the trim here. And the file, we agree that the room size is way too big. Okay, the filter. Basically, if I say I want the reverb to occur only on the high frequencies of my original signal, I get this.
I'm not going to tell you.
So I have a treble-only reverb.
I'm not going to tell you anything.
Instead, wanting only bass, I'll do something like this.
I'm not going to tell you anything.
It's a bit like dampening too. Okay?
Terrible.
So here, in fact, we're filtering the original signal up and down, and that's what will be affected by the reverb, but the original signal doesn't move. If I engage in this process, conduct an extensive filtration to the bottom, remove wet, insert dry, the result is my dry remains with my initial unfiltered signal. It's really what passes through the reverb that's filtered.
Terrible.
Okay?
Terrible.
Without high frequencies.
Terrible.
With high frequencies, with only high frequencies.
Yes, donc ça c'est le filter.
Therefore, the final module is known as the channel tool. Now this thing, hang on to it, because it's unstoppable logic, but basically it's used to route reverbs all over the place, adding or subtracting reverbs from each other and sending them to lots of different channels. So it's indeed engaging when you discover that there are multiple D-reverb files all located within the very same plugin. So what we're going to do is create a new, rather large file. We'll take the big room from earlier, open. It's done. Don't forget to remove the 18 dB from our big room, otherwise it'll be unbearable. And the files, we'll put them both before the channel tool.
Tac, 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 tac.
And so, to clean things up a bit, I'm going to remove all this just like that. We get it? File, channel tool. My initial file is labeled big room. My second file is my living room. So at this juncture, to make the understanding process substantially easier, my first file, big room, I'm going to mix it in mono. Okay. My second file, already mono, but I'll mix it mono anyway. So you have to understand the logic here. Initially, there are many things you can do. So we have swap, copy, add, subtract, or convolve. So swap is swapping channels, copy is copying a channel to another, add is adding a reverb to another reverb, subtract, we subtract a reverb, in other words we actually add the reverb, but in phase opposition, and convolve, we multiply the two reverbs in the frequency domain. It's a convolution product, so it's a product of two audio signals in the frequency domain. By default it's swap, they put it first, but already you're completely lost as to what it does. So let's start with add something, we'll understand better. First we'll see that our files here, my big room and my living room, I can assign to channels. So, since they're mono, I'll be able to assign my big room file to channel 1 and my living room to channel 2. Then it goes like this. If I decide to remove my living room someday, I'm missing a thing here, okay? If I erase all, got nothing. What does it mean? It means that my channel 1 of my reverb, the channel count, how many channels does this source include? Because if I have a stereo reverb, I'll have to take the channel 1 source and say channel count 2. I start with source 1, but I take two channels, 1 and 2. And what do I do next? I add, and then I choose on which channel I want to add my channel 1. So this is channel 2. So I have the same two things. But if I say I'm adding my channel in 3, that's going to add another track. So I'll have my channel 1 with my reverb, a channel where there's nothing, channel 2 where there's my living room reverb but which I haven't checked, and in 3 I'll still have my channel 1 which is added to nothing. So this implies I'll have this empty channel and then this 3. Sure, it works. Okay, so I added to this channel 3 where there was nothing, my reverb 1. If my reverb 1, now it wasn't mixed mono, then in channel 2 I have my second channel of my reverb 1. So that's why it's displayed here. If we consider a situation in my channel tool where source channel 1 is mentioned, but in reality 2 channels are in my source channel. On proceeding to copy from channel 3, it results in the addition of a new channel. It does so by copying these 2 identified channels and placing them starting from channel 3, taking up the slots of 3 and 4. So by setting channel count to 2, it now gives me 4 channels. If I copy them, it's the same thing since copying is added to nothing. It's same, but if I subtract them, indeed you can see it changes just slightly here. Look, when I subtract and add, AD indeed does this. And there you see there's a micro dot there that goes down to the bottom. Careful, look here, right here.
Up.
In fact, I'm reversing the phase of my reverb. I'm actually copying my reverb, but in phase opposition. And multiply. What'll happen? It's a product. So, exercise. Pause the video and guess what it will do if I press convolve. Well, did you figure it out? Well, look, I've got this channel that I'm going to multiply by something that's in 3 and 4. In 3 and 4, in fact, there's nothing, I've routed nothing in 3 and 4. Here it's in 2, in 3s, and here it's in 1. So if I multiply something with 0, it's going to be 0. So if I carry out convolve, well then, I will really end up with nothing at all. It works. If I set channel count 1 now, it's going to take away this track because it's only going to multiply channel 1 on track 3. So if I make it 1, I'll have my 2 with just 1 track left. If I now put this file in mix mono, this will disappear. So mix mono, that disappears. But in my channel 2, I still have my channel 1 multiplied on channel 3, multiplied by 0. And so I have an empty channel 3. Now, if I do add again, what will that do? Like copy. This will duplicate this reverb onto channel 3 for me. There, I hope you've understood the logic of the trick. At the outset, it's crucial to set it to automatic, otherwise you'll be confused as it's a looping process. The more you change channel, you can have up to, I don't know how many channels, in fact it makes the operation loop. So here I have 1, 2, 3 channels. If I input 6, you'd see the source from channel 1 is duplicated to channel 3. Essentially, it's copied to the 3rd channel. And then it starts all over again. It's like it's my channel 1 source, then it copies it to 3. So if I do 23, it gives me this looping pattern. Better to set it to automatic. Otherwise, it's completely confusing. Okay? Tac. So now in application, why would you use this trick? The application I've found perhaps is when you're doing multi-channel and you want to play with reverbs and not put the same reverbs on the same speakers and add reverbs in some speakers and not in others. For instance, I show a shot with a room, characters are inside, engaged in exchange of words, the scene is captured from behind the camera. So we have the reverse shot, we have another room that's open and doesn't have the same reverb. So you have to imagine that you're in a small room with not much reverb, like my living room. There's an individual communicating with us from a next door room, so the character's in a big next room with lots of reverb. So that could be our case here, but we're going to want to have my living room reverb in the left-right, for example, and a little bit of my big room reverb in the surround speakers. So how's it done? Well, hang on guys, it's here, it's level 6. I'm already going to hide that. Then, in terms of routing, I'm going to put everything in 6 channels because I'm doing 5.1, so 6 channels. Not at all what I want to do. So I'll add 6 channels and here 1 to 6. This one too, I'm going to route it and I'm going to put it in 6 channels. Normally my master was already in 6 channels, so now I've got 6 channels there instead of 2. Okay, 6 channels in, my VST only has 2. Now I possess 2 reverbs, one is specifically mono and the other is stereophonic. I only really need 3 channels, but we're going to use 4 anyway.
4.
Okay, now we're thinking. My signal 1 here is that this signal I'm processing, there's only one channel in this track that emits sound, and that's my channel 1. So this reverb is attacked by my audio signal 1, and all the reverb channels are attacked by the signal. Back to my files. This one is in 1. It's my big room, but now I'm going to put it in stereo. So it's in 1, 2. And my living room reverb is in mono anyway. Even if I mix it mono, so I don't want it in 2, I want it in 3. If I remove my channel tool, unchecking it, I'll have my first 2, my big reverb, and in 3 my little reverb. Up. And now in fact what do I want to do? I want to have this one in the first two, left, right, and I want to have this one added to this one and this one in channel 5 and 6 in my surrounds. Okay, so that's the exercise. It's a bit hot, so what do? I'm going to try to send my small reverb into my channels 1, 2 and my channels 1, 2. They'll go to 1, 2. So in my SMPTE order it's left, right, but then I'm going to use 3 and 4. But these 3 and 4 I'm going to send them in 5, 6 because in SMPTE my 5, 6 is the left surround and the right surround. So VST3 I'm going to send to output 5 and VST4 I'm going to send to output 6. To get a better idea, I'll also create a REA surround pan effect. So REA surround pan in 6 channels with 4, this is the LFE. So in 6 I'm supposed to have my right surround, in 5 my left surround, in 3 my center and left, right. Okay? And now I'll see what's modulating here. So now I'm doing play. So loud. It's very, very, very loud. My wet, I'm already turning it down. And now we see that things are happening on the left and right. And a little on the right surround. And less on the left surround activated. Okay, so the goal is to send my first, so my living room there. I'm going to put it on 1K. And so this is my living room. As it's in 1, I'm going to put it at the beginning. Concerning my second, I'll place it into a 3-4 arrangement. Okay, 1, 3, 4, which I can also do to have it in stereo. This one I can create a new file with my living room here. So impulse response, IR matchet. This one, living room, open. I've got a third one that I put before it, and I put it in 2. Up. It differs. Why? Because in my file 2 I'm normal and in my file 1 I'm at minus 18 dB. So as the reverb is weak, I'll normalize it to get the same signal. So okay, now I'm fine. I've got 2 reverbs. I've got the same reverb going off in 1, 2 and the same reverb going off in 3, 4. And in my thing, my 3, 4, 5, 6. Therefore, let's listen. Let's hit play. Here it's short. So it's a little reverb, so everything's fine. And here, in left surround, right surround, it's long. Okay. So that means I've got the right reverb, I've got the long reverb here on the right channels, so it works. But in fact what happens is that in real life, the person in the big room is also affected by the small reverb. So I want to add the small reverb to the big reverb. And that's where we're going to use our channel tool. What's the channel tool? It's the channel sources. There's a 2. So source channel is 1, but channel count is 2. There are 2 channels which start from 1. I add them together starting from channel 3. So it does, if I uncheck this, we'll see that there's a tiny little thing going on here. Okay. Here there are things that are added. Ah well, you see these are indeed my 2 reverbs, my initial pair of files. So now I've got something a bit realistic.
You're terrible.
Now though, what's going on? The reverb we're dealing with, it's notably intense compared to the 2 channels. This leaves the sound unbalanced. The dosage between this reverb and that reverb is not right, because we're watching what's going on in the little room. And someone far from the camera is talking. So this reverb should be weaker. So the thing is, if we put it here, we could add a trim gain stretch. Okay, let's put it there. Except that's going to affect all 3. So what you have to do is take the reverb you want to modify and put it in first. We'll put the big room first, and we'll put the gain stretch trim after the first. These won't be affected by the trim gain. And then I'll be able to lower the gain of this reverb. So it'll be nicer here. And if I set it to 0, we'll only find my living room reverb since I've added it. Check it out. Okay, so now I can dose here, and it goes like this.
You're terrible. You're terrible.
If he could stop with his motorcycle nearby, we maybe could hear the reverb. Thanks a lot.
You're terrible.
Okay, so here we have a much finer dosage. So here I've measured one against the other. If I think it's too loud, well, I can turn it down on wet and compensate by adding gain here. The wet aspect influences all reverberation effects. I can compensate by adding gain here on my reverb so that it will compensate for the wet here.
You're terrible.
Yeah, but more importantly, how's my flat?
Your flat's fine. Just...
So that's how you can juggle reverb routings with the channel tool. There's a video by John Tidy on the channel tool where he tries to explain how it works, etc. To explain, but the problem is that first off, he's using files, not impulse responses. He uses instruments, just about any file. So why not? Because when you make music, you want to be creative, to do things. Yet Convolution Reverb truly isn't intended for that purpose. But it works. You can put any file in a line and it's going to give you something weird, some kind of weird reverb. But what we're trying to do with the Convolution Reverb isn't to make weird reverbs. It's to make realistic reverbs. So it plays with the channel tool and so on. But it's really interesting because it allows you to be hyper creative and try out all kinds of tricks and maybe even make multi-channel music. For the moment, the only application I can think of for channel tool is playing with reverb additions and subtractions for multi-channel audio-visual applications. But obviously it doesn't stop there and you can be mega creative with this thing. But to understand how it works, it's best to have fairly conventional reverbs and play with it. I hope you got it all figured out, but I had a hard time understanding the logic at first. Once you've grasped the logic, then you can juggle and have fun doing whatever you want with your reverb routings. A little bonus. I told you we could also use Apple's impulse responses. If you've GarageBand or Logic Pro, there's likely a convolution reverb, and so, in your system's audio library, you have Apple impulse responses. Except that in fact the extension is SDR. So SDIR isn't a dot wave and it doesn't open with reverb effect. But in fact it's just fluff. It's a dot wave in fact. So all you have to do is this. You take rooms. Let's copy it to the desktop to see. So I do this options and in rooms there. In fact, what you're doing is renaming all your files. So renaming here, I'd already done that before, obviously. So you replace the text, the SDIR, you replace them with wave, and then you rename, and that's it. Apply it to all files, or else you'll be stuck there for 2 hours. And then you have your waves in there, and when you read them, well, they produce impulse responses that are compatible with reverb. Little bonus. That's it, we've just seen all the functions you can use in Reverb, so I'll stop here. Reverb. I don't know how long this video will be, but I'm guessing 1 hour, so I hope you've understood everything.
Je te fais des gros bisous et je te dis à plus.